So, welcome to our closing plenary, where we're going to talk with some of the folks who sat with us for a little more than half the day on November 4th to talk about the stories of Cleveland and where they live. But in order to start that conversation, I would like to turn it over to Paul Farber.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us throughout this day. And we're talking about memory. So for those folks who are going to be watching not live, but ahead, hello to you too. Thank you for joining us for this really special closing session. And I want to just kind of put in context, some things we've been talking about throughout the day. That Monument Lab is really thrilled to be working over the next year with the CMA and bookended by the Keithley Symposium this year and next year in cooperation and coordination with Case Western Research University. And this is a project that was a long time coming, in that we started working on it before the pandemic. We had ideas. Those ideas floated away. We had to rethink those ideas, and it just, for us, we're very, as a group, as a studio, we are really steeped in sight and conversations with people. And it's really, frankly, it was difficult to get started without the ability to travel, without the ability to ground ourselves. In addition to that, when we were first introduced to the idea around the Keithley Symposium, first thought was to center potentially around an object in the collection, which was very difficult to commune with. So one of the things before we get started, if we can just pull up the title slide, I want to just talk about this was not intended to be that object, but I think it has become it in some ways. This is a map that looks like the kind of map you'd pull down in a classroom or you'd have printed out. We found it when we went through the staff entrance of this building, hanging up there, and in speaking with some of the staff, including Janet. Thank you, Janet. Understanding that this is a map that has carried over from a different era of this building, that before we could drop a pin, before we could ask Waze to take us on the most efficient path, this was a map that was used at the loading dock to be able for drivers to make deliveries. And it stuck around. In this image, you can't see the cinder block around it, and I think it's just seeing that kind of crystallize for us and our collaborators here, in some ways, the profound nature of place memory, and also what has to be held onto and created, what we inherit and what we shape. So I just wanted to give some context for that map, and just seeing in the previous presentation all kinds of other maps and the story maps and the experiences, the new layers has been so wonderful today. We're learning a lot and appreciative. And in addition to that, in addition to finding that kind of grounding object and with a life around it, one of the things that we asked Kijo and Charles and the team here was to, before diving into exactly what our projects would be and how we work, so we really want to actually learn from folks, especially those in your respective institutions. We wanted to talk to museum educators and frontline staff, and we wanted to talk to staff at Case Western, and because we always want to hear from artists, we wanted to hear from artists. And we said before we kind of branch out and go out, let's start within. So we were able to, thanks to really thoughtful knitting together of the conversations, gather. Some of us were there earlier last month, and we started to kind of play around with two questions that were asked earlier this morning and have been kind of grounding for us, which are, what is the story of Cleveland and where does it live? And just to note on that question, there is not one story. It doesn't live in one place. It's meant as a prompt to help open up possibilities about mapping stories, mapping understandings, but also, as we've been talking about, dealing with what's elusive on maps, what's elusive to memory, what needs to be told as a mechanism of speaking truth to power. And so we did this workshop. We spent a half a day together. I'm going to try to advance the slide here. And I don't know, for those of you who, it's nice to be digital, but it's really nice to be tactile. For the school supplies crew out there, real Post-it notes, tape, pens, Sharpies. I mean, and you said this is the kind of work that we at Monument Lab love to do, and clearly we have some like-minded thinkers here. And we split up into groups. We examined a very basic base map of Cleveland and asked participants to guide us through the city from that vantage point. So for the purpose of our closing plenary today, we want to hear from participants, get back together, and hear a bit about what that experience was like, and also use that as a vantage point to think about the stories of Cleveland, where they live, where they don't live, and also speaking from each of your perspectives here as staff and as members of this community, as well as surrounding ones. So we're gonna go around and everyone will introduce themselves and speak around kind of two questions that you should feel free to answer or break or reinvent, which is, what did you take away from our roundtable session together, and what kinds of monuments do you feel Cleveland needs right now?
Awesome, so I'll get us started. My name is Selena Higginbottom, and I work here at the museum in youth and family engagement. So really working directly with the communities and trying to provide an experience to connect them to the museum and the collection. Our roundtable discussion was amazing. It was eye-opening for me, I think, in the ways where I thought about monuments as more like statuesque, something that has a plaque on the front, something very like that you would see in a textbook. And that kind of opened up my perspective to the things that I hold value in, like, for example, music venues in Cleveland that have been around for like decades. Those could be considered monuments. So yeah, I think that was what I got out of it mostly, was just this eye-opening experience, talking about the monuments in Cleveland. And as far as what we need, I'm a Cleveland native, and I think that what we need is more representation in monuments. Cleveland is a melting pot. We hear that all the time, but I don't think that all of our monuments represent that melting pot. The large immigrant population, the large population of Black and brown people in the community. And I think that kind of speaks to how individually we hold value in monuments. When we don't see ourselves, do we value these monuments in the same way as if we were to see ourselves? So yeah.
Thanks, Selena.
Awesome. So my name's Clara Vera. I'm the public health manager at Case Western Reserve University in Health and Counseling Services. So I really enjoyed to kind of take a break out of my normal pandemic work, I feel like, and do some of this monument, and I think this is really public health in a way. And I learned so much, because I think when I think of monuments, I think we talked about it earlier, you think of the war statues or the big horse with somebody on it. And someone mentioned a lot of street art or parks. I think Betsy mentioned parks. And the street art meant so much to me, because of Clark and Fulton. So I grew up outside in a suburb of Cleveland, but in Cuyahoga County, and now I currently reside in Cleveland. But my family comes from what used to be Ohio City, which was where a lot of Puerto Ricans and Latinx families lived. And so I think I really view like the monuments from talking. I realized what Clark and Fulton means to me, because they've repainted all the abandoned shops to look like shops. Welcome. And so they've repainted it to look like what it used to look like. And I think that's so meaningful, because when I go to visit a lot of my family that lives there, it doesn't feel abandoned or anything. It feels like it's preserving that culture, even though they've been kind of gentrified and pushed over on the other side of 90. And that's what the Monument Lab really did for me, was I thought about that when I came home. Like, that's all I kept thinking about, was that's so meaningful to me as a monument, and I would never have thought about that before. So then that kind of coincides with my second answer, right? Is like, we need so much more representation of Black and brown people. I think that there is such a rich Puerto Rican culture and heritage, especially on the west side of Cleveland, that you probably couldn't find unless you're a part of it. You know, you'll see some parts of it, but it's not very well developed or invested in, and I think there's just so many rich communities in food and people that can be completely honored and represented. And I think they talked about a lot of the duality of people in previous sessions, so I think Cleveland could use a lot of that, specifically over in those areas.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Betsy Banks. I'm the director of the Center for Civic Engagement and Learning, or CECL, at Case Western Reserve University. Like others, I had a wonderful time at the roundtable. It was really eye-opening to me to go beyond statues or things like the Washington Memorial. One of the things I was thinking about during the session was about, I grew up a daughter of a geologist and spent a lot of time outside, and so I was thinking about the Emerald Necklace and how place you can imprint your own experiences on. So you might be at a big family reunion barbecue at the Metro Parks, you might be walking by yourself or with a partner. So thinking about how stories can overlay places was something I took away, and also the clustering. I think Charles referred to it as bundles, and you can see in the diagram how we sort of clustered, like Selena was saying, around music or different cultural areas or food or things like that in Cleveland. I think there's lots of bundling, and just making sure that all the voices are heard in those bundles is really important. And in terms of thinking about what we need, because I work in the civic engagement space at a university, I'm often thinking about college students. And at Case Western, we have so many students who are from faraway places, out of state, different cities. And even though they're temporary, often residents, I think they're really important residents to have the stories of Cleveland understood and explored. And so I think through my department, we try to have experiences, relationship building, understanding history. We took several hundred students to the Sculpture Center's Crossroads exhibit this fall, and it was really impactful for those students. So I think one thing to consider is the students who are here, maybe temporarily, but they are telling stories about Cleveland to each other year after year. Someone mentioned the terrible phrase of "don't go under the bridge" about East Cleveland. So these stories can be negative that are told year to year as well as positive. And so I think we need to be working hard to have accurate stories, multiple voices heard by those students at a time where they're really learning a lot, and they're going to go on to tell the story of Cleveland in other places as well. And so I think sometimes thinking about visitors to a city and how we might be able to convey true stories and multiple voices to visitors or to students is really important too.
Hi, my name's Michelle Cha. I work as an assistant director in student advancement, part of student success. Part of my job is also in academic resources, working with students who speak English as a second language. When I came to the first roundtable, I thought to myself, what is a monument? Am I going to get this wrong? And in my mind, I thought, like the thinker at the art museum or the Leo statue where my husband and I got our wedding picture taken, like those were important to me in my story of Cleveland. As we spent the day and talked more, I realized that other items people brought up were significant to me also. We talked about graffiti. Someone brought up graffiti that you see along the rapid route, and I thought, I ride that every day. I see that every day. Like, that's part of my story, and the people that ride the rapid with me, that's part of their story. And then my mind just starts going because all of our discussions really opened up all the different elements of Cleveland. When I look at what we did in our clustering of ideas, it brings me back to different cultures represented in different pockets of Cleveland. And I've always thought about that. You know, I'm part Italian, but no one ever celebrated that. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's Little Italy. You know, there it is. And then, you know, there's Slavic Village, and there it is. And that brings me to the idea that there are so many different parts of Cleveland, so many living cultures that seem to be separate, but they are part of the whole. And I believe it was Grace earlier who kept looking for a word, you know, and that's what we need. So to answer that second question, like, whatever the word is Grace was looking for, I think that's what we need to encompass all of these different parts into one whole. We have a lot going on, you know, a lot of exciting things, and you know, I think not everything is represented, and I feel as if there are a lot of elements missing, but if we bring it all together, that'll be a good thing.
I think you're.
Well, hello. My name is Samira Akrom. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for making space for me. So I thought the roundtable was extremely powerful. My group, I love dearly. We were very zealous and colorful and just did kind of whatever we wanted to do, but it told a cohesive story. What I do think a monument was different. Like Celena, I thought it was a statue or a historical place. Just saying, like my grandmother's church, East Mount Zion on 100th and Euclid is a monument because it was part of the Underground Railroad. And a lot of times growing up, being a native of the city, we don't always appreciate the beautiful history that our city has because we're like, oh, we're from here, like whatever, you know? But just growing up, and then in my young adult years, I kind of start delving into our culture. And I started unraveling lots of things, like Cleveland was the 4th largest city in the early 1900s. The term of rock and roll was coined here. In the 80s and 90s, Cleveland was Vegas. But, you know, because of corruption, money, and all different types of negative stereotypes, a lot of people don't know that, like, if you want to go somewhere in Cleveland and you've never been here and you want to try some Ethiopian foods, we have a couple places to go. I'm like obsessed with the pierogi lady because I just love pierogies. I mean, there's something for everybody here. And I think that being able to break off into the groups, make these beautiful charts and tell the stories, each from our lens, gave us a more comprehensive idea of what Cleveland is, what kind of makes a metropolitan city, you know, what makes everything ticking and work together. I do believe, and I will touch on what everybody else did say, about the representation of colors. I think everybody needs a monument, definitely Black and brown people, but I feel like there's Asians that they can, you know, they have Chinatown, but I feel like there could be a monument for them. A lot of their cultures have very deep, long, ancient histories. I feel that we can make it more where it's kind of not just white and privileged that you see all the time. I mean, we get it. We live in America, so we see that every day. But it's kind of like, how do we use that? Or how do we use our platforms to kind of expand upon what a monument is? So I'm hoping that this was kind of like spark something in somebody that we can have a statue for like different people and just all walks of life. Cleveland has birthed lots and lots of brilliant and talented people, from Hollywood to music to architecture to painting to just everything. So I'm hoping that, you know, this again will spark a change that we need.
I need my clicker. Thank you. Click. Is it working? There we go. Okay. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about my art practice and how it informs my thinking about a Cleveland monument, and we're in one right now. So as someone who uses all kinds of technology to combine physical materials, digital media, sound, dance, in different languages, in different countries, different disciplines, methods, and dimensions, what I've learned is that the pieces from which we construct our current reality are already within us as the recollections of movements, rituals, images, sounds, symbols, gestures, and so on. And one of the things I've always strived for in my work is to let others feel the power of being part of an artistic endeavor and to share this process, whether through immersion or through play. One example of this is shockwaves. Okay, there it is. An 82-minute long looping cinematic assemblage funded by my 2011 Guggenheim Fellowship. I used over 25,000 film and sound samples to weave together the conscious and unconscious, reality and fantasy, childhood and adulthood in a kaleidoscopic, intertwining network that defines us as feeling, thinking, acting beings. The viewer is immersed in dense and layered storytelling that mimics and draws on their own subconscious and thus provokes memories in a multitude of ways. There's your key word there. Sine Waves from the Optics of Memory project, my multi-year series of public artworks and events, was funded by the John S. Knight Foundation. Sine Waves is a set of interactive, user-driven display stations that capture the gestures of onlookers, whose movements in turn become looped generative material for the art. Their actions are repeated over and over again in an ongoing feedback loop, creating patterns of infinite complexity. The gesture is not just a deconstruction of individual movements, but a representation of the sum of its parts, with themes and patterns emerging, potentialities that undulate through space and time. And there she's using sine waves. Another interactive and even more playful and even goofy project is an app I developed called Shufflehead, a kind of free association game of civilization, a puzzle with an exponential number of solutions, an entire digital realm that explores human and not so human interconnection, and just for fun, a perpetual coloring book and music maker. Shufflehead demonstrates, in the grand eonic scheme of things, the superficiality of our concepts of identity. One of the things the pandemic made clear is that we're all linked together as one organism and affect each other in ways we had not imagined. Shufflehead was a way for me to express this, but in a very entertaining way. They play out. So these projects challenge the question of why we've become so trapped in such tight conceptual shackles that we can no longer imagine the possibility of reinventing ourselves. So I make art to make sense of chaos. My process of cutting things up, reforming them, and making something new out of the bits and pieces is a way to begin to see how identities are defined and truths are constructed. There you go. I feel that a culture's greatest assets are intangible, monuments as stockpiles of shared expressions. The intellectual property of rituals, gestures, sounds, symbols, and images, the raw materials of my art. Way to go. Yes. Cleveland is a migrant city that reverberates with a plurality of histories and customs and has withstood shifting physical, political, and cultural environments. Yet, there's a certain character that coalesces around it, a project of collective self-creation. An appropriate monument for Cleveland might be an interactive, scalable structure or meeting place. Maybe it's physical or virtual. fluid and evolving over time, depending on those who interact with it, and from what vantage point they view it. Something personal and universal at the same time. A way for Clevelanders to create, take part in, and even grow a monument of their own, revealing new ways to connect the past, present, and future. And that's it. And that's my website. So I over-prepared, obviously.
We want to thank all of our roundtable presenters.
Oh, and by the way, I want a copy of that slide with the tape.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Is it possible for, during our conversation, to actually pull that slide back up,
I think
too?
so. Yes.
Oh, we should put, yeah, I want to see that.
Let me see. I'll move us back to it, and maybe we could project it as well. The slide that has our maps that we made during the roundtable day.
Can I ask a question to hear from anybody and everybody? Because we've been talking about your different approaches and experiences. And throughout the day, too, we've been talking about things we've inherited from the past, whether they're monuments or maps or archives. So you're in a room together with some folks you know, some folks you don't know. I mean, in a room together is already sounding intense. Nowadays, maybe always, but nowadays. Well, what was it like for you to try to build a map on a new map? Like, how did things fit? How did that experience go in trying to bring different pieces to come together?
I think it was an amazing experience. There's things that I had no idea existed in certain areas that other people were like, oh yeah, I go there all the time. And I think the same was for like my experience being from Cleveland. I know things that are like in little pockets of little neighborhoods where I grew up. So I grew up on the east side of Cleveland, so there's things that I knew that others didn't and others knew that I didn't. So it was a really great learning experience.
I'm going to say, well, I just wanted to say I'm a part of the group with all the tape.
It's all about the tape.
It's her fault. But she made it pretty. The thing that I think was floating through my mind is how do I even put in words what I feel Cleveland is. I tried my best to put little gems in the city. Like I know for a fact, one of the Post-its that is on ours, I bring up the Negro League baseball field that's in Huff. Huff is known as a very rough neighborhood. It used to be very pretty. It is also a neighborhood that some of the civil rights riots were in. And like a lot of people don't know about that. I'm not gonna lie, I don't spend much time in Huff, no offense, but I do love and know people and, you know, travel through there. And just when I was told that story, actually by my boyfriend, I was like, wait, that started here? Clara, your story about the Tremont area blew my mind because, again, I'm non-Puerto Rican, but I would have never known. Because I was just there that summer, you know, seeing it in all the restaurants, and you're like, yeah, no, my dad was here, we used to go here, and I'm like, oh, wow. So it almost makes you want to, like, I wish I had a time machine to see what Cleveland was versus what it is now and what, you know, I saw built in my day. Like, I was joking with a friend that we were like, oh, you remember when the Science Center became a thing? You remember when the Rock Hall was a thing? You, like, you know, funny things of that nature. And I think, like, just being able to take something away, I feel like even if it's not something big or like there's so much here. And if you just stop and take a second and just look and just read, you'll find that like this, you've been sitting on a beautiful wealth, like a diamond mine almost. And that was really pretty. Selena, you said something about the musical man?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's a monument here. I never paid attention to it. And then she was like, the musical man. Then I drove by, I was like, that's the musical man. And it was just great, you know, being able to collab with people and see different, you know, viewpoints. Michelle and Kasumi were also in my group, and, you know, being able just to bounce off the ideas and talk about, like, for example, I live in the Buckeye Shaker neighborhood. I live right by St. Luke's. So I'm literally in earshot of the bell. A lot of people don't know. St. Luke's was a hospital. I was actually born in it. Most of Cleveland was born in it, to be frank, and it got shut down. But the bell tower still rings every, I believe, 15 minutes. Definitely every hour, but I think it's like every 15 minutes as well. And so just something small like that, I'm like, oh man, okay, I can still hear the bell. Like, you know, even though it's not working, it's still working, you know? So I thought that was really precious and dear that I actually could share what I believe Cleveland is.
I want to, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, with working together with the tape group, at first I'm like, is this the right answer? But, you know, even being from different parts of Cleveland, I felt like we started to feed off of each other and the ideas. And then even though there might have been different locations we were talking about, there were common themes that we were bringing up. So it started, it started to move more quickly, and as you can see, it blossomed.
It ended up in...
But it was interesting. I think we found more commonalities as we worked together and brought up ideas, and it was really cool to see what resulted.
That was pretty much the point, though.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's all about the tape.
Yes.
It's
And
the
the tape
connective...
glued it together, yes.
It's all about the tape.
So I'm not in the tape group. I am in the middle group, but so we used prominent Post-it notes. But what I was going to say is it actually revealed a lot of, and I think true Clevelanders understand this in the West Side versus East Side, or the West Side, East Side divide. And I'm not obviously, but I've mentioned, I'm from the West Side. And I think that's what revealed to me. And there was this awesome artist, she's not here today, who's an older woman. I think she's in her 70s.
Gwendolyn Garth.
Yeah, and she was in my group, and I wish you guys could hear her stories. They were so rich in nature, and I think I learned so much about, you know, as I was putting down, so we were feeding off each other because we had different experiences as, you know, someone who's coming back to Cleveland and recognizing certain things from the West Side perspective, and nuances that I never learned from the East Side, and how now that I work at Case, I think I even mentioned it back when we were all just congregating, I'm learning so much more about Cleveland because I'm breaking that divide. And so this map was really that, like, hit yourself in the face moment of, it's not that far. You know, it's like really not that far to just go 10 minutes to see that monument and kind of experience a different culture that's not only, you know, Puerto Rican or German or Irish Catholic, which is where I kind of all grew up in my realm. So I really took away from that.
Fantastic. I'm wondering if I could ask you all a question, because what I found fascinating in your answers to what are the kinds of monuments that Cleveland leads now, I think with maybe the exception of Kasumi, they were mostly about representations of valor, right? How positive representations. And I want to ask you, can monuments be a provocation? Do they always need to be valorous? Like, what are your thoughts on public statements that are monuments to the complications? In some ways, I was thinking, Kasumi, about the cutting and splicing as a way of thinking about those things together. So I would love to hear from some of the other panelists here, and you as well, Kasumi, about that idea. And it's for anyone.
May I ask you to further delve on your question?
Sure. So I guess that what I'm thinking is, the idea is, I guess in some ways, what's coming to mind for me are the ways in which the equestrian monument to Robert E. Lee was covered over. with graffiti, with images of George Floyd, and I'm wondering about the ways in which, instead of transforming existing monuments, can we build monuments to the complicated connections that we have? Not a monument to unity, but a monument to the ways that we have to reckon with our own egos, histories, pain and trauma, and that be a monument to that work rather than to the utopian result of that work. Yeah.
Thank you. I would say that I would like to see a monument of, okay, there's a monument, the Freedom Stamp, that I was told that should have been that, like that prodigal statue to emphasize freedom. But then freedom's also very subjective because not all of us have it. So I would think that a monument that kind of, I don't know, I have a thing with hands. And so I think like maybe something with a whole bunch of hands of different cultures, or, it could be a brown hand and a tattooed hand, and the tattoo hand could be of an indigenous culture or somebody else's culture, and then you can add, young people, old people, or just something that, yes, collectively we all can agree on, because I don't really feel like we have that here.
Yeah.
Yeah, collective is not, and if we do, it would be here. So, like personally, I would love to see two monuments. One to either in Collinwood or in Huff for the civil rights riots. I keep bringing those up. I have had family members that were in it, or around it, or in the neighborhood. Also, I would like the park that Tamir Rice was shot in to be a monument to him and all the people that have met that unfortunate fate. Just because it sheds light on a justice system that was not built to protect people that didn't look like the people who made the system. And you can take that however you need to. So something simple like that, I think would be great, just to remember all of those people that have fallen. And just quickly, I'll touch on this one in the Imperial 123rd neighborhood, which is down the street from me actually, was where the horrific murders of Anthony Sowell happened. They tore that house down and now made it a memorial garden for the victims and their families. So there's things like that. I feel like that would make people feel better, in sense of being seen, being heard, and just, a garden's not gonna bring anybody back, but at least you don't feel so slapped in the face or hushed or brushed under the carpet. It's like, hey, this happened. Let's just acknowledge it, figure out what we need to do, and keep moving. I think that is something just overall in society. We need to stop acting like we're so perfect and just be like, okay, well, this happened here and this happened here, so what can we do to not repeat it? We have to learn our history. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
So I was going to touch on the Tamir Rice. I was going to say that at first. But then I started thinking, as you're more talking about it, and from a public health lens and healthcare lens, I think we talk about access so much in healthcare and right patient, right time. And I think Cleveland is an epicenter of health, right? We have some pretty amazing health centers here. And I walk into, all white walls, and I see just all the monuments of all the leaders before, which were white and male. And I look at myself as someone who wants to grow professionally and work with a lot of people, young, adults or people who are moving forward, hopefully, and upward. And I don't see myself there, and there's those monuments, and then there's also this piece where medical's done a lot of harm to people of brown and black ethnicities, and I just think that there's something to be said for recognizing that and trying to do better. And I think I struggle with whether it's a monument or whether it's stories, because I don't know, like, I struggle with how can we rectify that I still don't feel safe going to certain providers, right? And I have a list in my phone of providers I will not go to and I will recommend to my family to not go to. And I think there's a way that we can fix that, which will take a lot. But I do think there's a way to kind of like, right with the vaccine, I know this seems political, I don't want to be political on the vaccine, but everyone get your booster. And, but I think, you know, we're talking about how we're reaching out to communities and how we're going to get there and get these people access to adequate health care. And I just think there's ways to honor the history that is making the fear so big as to why they're not getting that care. And Cleveland has a lot of that. We're not the only city, that's across all of America. But I just think that with the institutions we have and CASE at the forefront, we can do a way better job of doing that. I don't know what that is, whether it is kind of something like you talked about, because that would be phenomenal. Because I don't think it's a true or an experience, really, I think would identify and understand why maybe people aren't as willing to get the resources and help they so need. So I really think public health and healthcare can do a lot here in Cleveland for that, instead of taking over cities, you know, instead of taking over areas and building a whole new building with white walls. The white, I think, means a lot to me too. So I just think there's a way we can recognize that, and we might not be in the situation we're in. So,
For sure.
that's mine.
To kind of like, oh, I'm sorry. You want to go?
You can go.
I was actually, when I think you first reached out to me or about doing this.
Yes.
My first baseline reaction was, let's take a bunch of monuments and statues and cut them up and put them
remember
back
you saying
together, which, you know, I love cutting stuff up, obviously, and using tape, and reassemble them. And then I was thinking something virtual or a combination of technology, you know, tech and physical materials that could be evolving and shaped by the people who interact with it would be, you know, a perfect thing. But, you know, depends on a lot of factors.
Yes, it does.
So that people could contribute stories that they feel are untold, and, you know, I want to be represented, so I'm going to be part of this monument.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So I can't help but think of, you know, when we first started talking about monuments, and, you know, I think, where does my mind go? Public square. There's monuments there. What are they? And then I called my mom, who did a video for one of her grad classes. What are those monuments, Mom? You researched. I don't remember. So you know, when you're talking about locations, I'm thinking to myself, most people pass through public square, and what is there? You know, something needs to be somewhere where a lot of people can see it. That is, you know, that's a location where something is there, we're not sure what it is. And then I'm also thinking, as people are talking about can it be utopian, does it have to be utopian, or can it be provocative? Could it be both? Like, as they were talking before, you know, to see the future and have the future, but we do need to see our past. So to recognize the issues, but hopefully guide people towards the utopia would be cool. But I don't know. I'm not the creative artist over here.
You're here now.
Did you want to go ahead, Selena?
Yeah. To kind of bounce off of what everybody else is saying, I think it's about presenting the complete history.
Absolutely.
Instead of like presenting the history that looks nice or that's sugar-coated. Because history, you know, there's a lot of facts in history, and I don't think we're always presented with all of the facts. We're presented with a lot of like opinions with monuments. We get one side of the story, and I think that completion of the history, like, yeah, like this happened, but also like this happened too, would just be helpful. with people being able to relate back to monuments and just getting the full story.
Yeah, to piggyback off of you and Clara, Michelle, Sumi, I really like that whole utopian and provocative thing. Like, I am a rebel in spirit. So I'm like, ooh, can we shake the rails a little bit? I do agree that, especially we'll just go with what Clara said, the healthcare. We need to be taught that the people of color, women, young people have really changed public health care for that we need to get rid of the stigma of, which I think is horrendous, but the stigma of how Black women don't feel pain. Black men don't feel pain. We're lying. We need to talk about, and to touch on that, like, talk about the history of how gynecology even became a practice. Talk about Henrietta Locke. Talk about maybe holistic ways of Far East Asia and the Middle East. There are certain things that they do and don't do that aids to how long they live. Certain herbs you can take, certain teas you can drink, certain supplements, that everything doesn't have to be a pill, because sometimes it always seems that we're trapped in that cycle of, okay, here's a diagnosis. Okay, here's a pill. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, here's a pill for that pill. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, here's 3 pills for the pill that was a pill that was a pill. Like, have you ever, really watched a medical commercial? And they're always like, yeah, diarrhea, upset stomach, death. It's just like, wait, what?
It's because the medical establishment doesn't look at the whole person.
Exactly.
You have to look at the whole person, like we have to look at the whole city, and it consists of all the bits and pieces that make us who we are.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
Exactly. And I just feel like, let's learn, who these people are. I noticed once I got to school, and I don't know what day it was. I think it was I don't know if it was Asian awareness or what it was. And I was just like, I can't name 5 in monumental people in Chinese culture. I can't name monumental people in Paki culture. I need to change that. That made me feel some type of way about myself, because I pride myself on knowing a little about a lot. And so like I said, if we are taught our real history and everybody, it's all encompassing, we can change things slowly but surely. And I'm hoping, again, if it's not us, which it probably will be, but if it's not us, that this will spark the idea, the revolution to change it, because you don't ever really understand how it impacts you until it does. And then you're just like, oh man. So yeah. That's great.
Thank you so much, Amira, and everyone. I think this is a good time for us to open it up for questions or comments from our audience. So we have a microphone, on this side of the room. If you have any comments or questions for anyone here on the panel, you can certainly walk up to the microphone. But Paul, I know as we're waiting for folks to come up, I'm wondering from you, what is Monument Lab's drive in structuring the questions here in Cleveland? Sort of what got us to that, what is the story of Cleveland? Because we started with, almost over a year ago, with what is an appropriate monument for Cleveland, to what is the story of Cleveland, and where does it live?
Yeah. So, first of all, just thank you again. Every time we get together, sparks do fly. That was a good word for it. And just really appreciating that and noting that with more time, hopefully, whether we get to keep building or other folks here can also build on, there's really a lot there. I think, again, I said this earlier in the day, but if folks weren't here, Monument Lab is a collective of people. Researchers, artists, curators, troublemakers, builders, and I think we like to ask questions that we don't know the answer to, and that there are a multitude of possible responses. And it's not actually about finding the winner. It's not about finding the right one, because that's not actually how civic engagement works. We actually have to knit together a lot of threads. And you know, just a person who's a real big inspiration in this work that I hope all of you get to meet at some point is Sue Mobley, our director of research, who's based in New Orleans and has been a big presence on this project. And a lot of what we've done, and when I say we, also Nico Rodriguez, who's here in the audience with us today, who's our project manager for this and a co-conspirator. And what we kind of tried to think through is recognizing the fact that for some projects that we've been able to be invited into, we have a lot of time to have FaceTime. And I mean that not on our phones, but face-to-face. And before we ever conduct a project, we're on the ground, we're talking to folks, we're having meals, we're figuring out what is the right approach. And often, you know, even if a lot of our team is in Philadelphia or New Orleans, every project is different based on where we are, because we have a value of respecting local knowledge, experience, and expertise while building strategy and tactic and coalition across regions. Project here, we've been really having a difficult time getting here. We had all these dreams. Like I said, you have the dreams, you gotta stay with them, but sometimes they don't have this exact timeline that you thought. And so we wanted to start at square one. And while there have been other projects that we have done, like we did a project in St. Louis that we learned a lot from with the Pulitzer Foundation, where we asked about 750 people how they would map the monuments of St. Louis. And in St. Louis, even if you haven't been there or you have, there is a giant gateway arch. We thought, like, can you make it disappear? Like David Copperfield, I guess, but you can't. But when we asked people to map monuments, of course, the arch was the #1 feature, but it was featured on fewer than half of the maps that we collected. And so while we thought that might be a way to kind of do a project here, we said, well, let's actually, before we identify that, before we knew that came after many visits and a long time together, let's actually start at square one. Let's ask about stories and where they live. And we want to start where we are. If we are, in fact, in residence or in engagement with the CMA and with CRU, we have to start with folks here. And while it's a great opportunity to have a symposium, we wanted to do our thinking before that with folks who are engaged in a variety of ways. And so that's been a real gift, and that's a part of our process. And I think that had we done the roundtable and the result was not this beautiful collection of different ideas and different maps, that would have taught us something. That maybe taught us to go a different way or to take a step back. This is also a part of that learning and building, to take it back to our team, but also to really be open to what we find here.
Thank you so much for that. And since it seems we don't have any questions from the audience this time, you all were so thorough. Exactly, you answered them all. But also I think people are going to be waiting to see what this group does together. And it allows us at the CMA, at CRU, and the Monument Lab to continue these conversations with you brilliant folks, and helps us to think about things like how does generational trauma shape the way that we experience space? How is it that, how do we capture the kaleidoscopic quality of history and time? How do we work through these networks and systems? I loved a question that came up earlier. How do you convince the powers that be to do something that is more experimental or hasn't been seen before or isn't necessarily a statement of glory in public space? And so this really allowed me, so I want to thank you, to think about that from a different perspective, because there are ways that when you are behind these walls, your framework can both expand, because it's global, we're an international collection, all of these things, but also can become really, really myopic. And so this was extremely helpful, so I want to make sure to forefront that the nature of that roundtable, that it was reciprocal, that we receive so much from it as well. So thank you. And thank you, Paul and Nico, for convening us. It was wonderful. And with that, we're just going to take 1 minute to switch our stage so that we can have our closing remarks. Let's please give a round of applause for our panelists.
Nicely done. Nicely done.